An abandoned German shepherd and a tiny kitten just wanted to be loved. Left in a duffel bag on a dark road, they were meant to disappear forever. But when one woman refused to walk away, she uncovered something far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. Why were these animals really left behind? What hidden secrets connect them to powerful people who will do anything to keep the truth buried? And when the fight for their lives collides with a fight for justice, who will survive? And who will fall? What really happened next? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The pre-dawn mist clung low to the rural two-lane road as Hollis Keene made her way to her early morning shift at Bell River Animal Shelter. Her old sedan's headlights cut through the grey darkness, illuminating the empty stretch ahead. The radio played softly, some country song about broken hearts and second chances, while Hollis fought back another yawn. After 3 years of working the early intake shift, she still wasn't used to the ungodly hours. A sudden screech of brakes pierced the quiet morning. Hollis's heart jumped as her hands automatically jerked the steering wheel. Her car swerved, tires grinding against the asphalt as she narrowly missed what looked like a large duffel bag lying in the middle of the road. "What in the world?" she muttered, pulling onto the shoulder. The bag wasn't still. It was moving. Before she could process what she was seeing, a pickup truck roared past her, its engine growling in the darkness. Hollis caught a glimpse of the license plate in her rearview mirror, TWR 247, the numbers burning into her memory as the truck disappeared around the bend. Her hands trembled slightly as she grabbed her flashlight from the glove compartment. The beam bounced across the pavement as she approached the writhing duffel bag. A low growl emerged from within, making her pause mid-step. "Easy there," she said softly, using the gentle voice she'd perfected over years of handling scared animals. "I'm here to help." The zipper was already partially open. When she carefully widened it, she found herself staring into the amber eyes of a German shepherd. The dog's face was marked with old scars, and its fur reeked of smoke. But what really caught her attention was the tiny grey kitten huddled against the dog's side, its fur similarly smudged with soot. "Oh, you poor things," Hollis whispered. The German shepherd's lips pulled back, showing teeth, but she noticed how carefully it was positioned around the kitten. Not aggressive, protective. Getting them into her car proved to be a challenge. The dog wouldn't move without the kitten, and the kitten seemed too terrified to budge. Finally, Hollis managed to slide the whole duffel bag into a back seat, keeping the top open so they could breathe. The drive to Bell River Shelter took only 10 minutes, but her mind raced the entire way. Who would do this? Why abandon them in such a dangerous way? The smoke smell bothered her. Had there been a fire? The shelter was still dark when she pulled up, but she had keys. As night intake clerk, she was used to handling emergency cases alone. What she wasn't prepared for was the reaction of her co-worker, Mark, when he arrived an hour later to find her attempting to examine the pair in the intake room. "They're both going to have to be marked as aggressive," he said, shaking his head as the German shepherd growled at his approach. "That dog's showing clear signs of territorial behavior, and we can't risk adopting out an animal with unknown history and aggressive tendencies." "He's not aggressive," Hollis argued, watching how gently the dog nosed the kitten. "He's protective. There's a difference." But Mark was already filling out the intake forms, checking the aggressive, unadoptable box that would start the shelter's 3-day clock. After that, if no owner came forward and no special circumstances were found, both animals would be euthanized. "The kitten too?" Hollis asked, her voice tight. "Can't separate them. See how the dog reacts when we try." "And we don't have resources to deal with behavioral cases right now. You know that, Hollis." She did know. The shelter was always overcrowded, always underfunded. But something about this case felt different. Wrong. While Mark went to handle other morning duties, Hollis started her own paperwork, a petition for a behavioral evaluation. It wasn't often granted, but she knew the shelter's policies inside and out. If she could prove there was reason to believe these animals were salvageable, she could buy them an extra 24 hours. "You're just scared," she murmured to the pair as she filed the forms. "And you've been through something awful, haven't you?" The German Shepherd's ears twitched at her voice. The kitten, finally feeling brave enough to explore, wobbled a few steps away from its protector before quickly scampering back. Hollis smiled. "You need names. Can't keep calling you dog and cat in my report." She studied them for a moment. "Ranger," she decided, looking at the German Shepherd's military-like bearing, despite his rough condition. "And you, little one, you're definitely a smudge." The names felt right. She added them to her petition, then spent the next hour carefully bathing them both. The smoke smell was stubborn, clinging to their fur despite her best efforts. Ranger proved surprisingly cooperative during his bath, though he kept his eyes fixed on Smudge the entire time. The kitten, once clean, revealed gorgeous grey fur beneath the soot. After the baths, she offered them food and water. The way they ate, quickly but not desperately, suggested they hadn't been strays long. Someone had cared for them recently. As her shift wore on, Hollis couldn't shake the growing unease in her stomach. The duffel bag in the middle of the road, the speeding truck, the smoke smell, it painted a picture she didn't want to see. Someone had wanted these animals found too late. Someone had tried to ensure they wouldn't survive to tell whatever story their presence might reveal. That night, after her shift ended, Hollis sat in her car in the shelter's parking lot. Her petition had bought 24 hours, but she knew it wouldn't be enough. The shelter's resources were stretched thin, and aggressive animals rarely got second chances. Looking through her window at the building where Ranger and Smudge now slept, Hollis felt something harden inside her chest. A quiet decision, but one that felt as solid as stone. She would not let a bureaucratic timeline decide their fate. These animals had survived whatever nightmare they'd escaped from. She wouldn't let them die because of a checkbox on a form. She pulled out her phone and began making calls. She had 24 hours to prove these animals deserved a chance, and she intended to use every minute of it. First, she'd need to find a certified behavioral specialist willing to work pro bono. Then, she'd need to secure fostering arrangements, prove she had a viable plan for rehabilitation. The sun was setting, painting the shelter building in shades of orange and gold. Hollis thought about the trust she'd seen in Ranger's eyes during his bath, the way Smudge had finally purred when she'd dried him with a soft towel. They deserved more than 3 days. They deserved a chance to heal, to trust again. "We're going to figure this out," she promised the empty parking lot. "Whatever happened to you both, it's over now. I won't let anyone hurt you again." She started her car, mind already mapping out tomorrow's battle plan. Sometimes the biggest acts of courage started with the smallest decisions, like refusing to turn away from animals in need, like standing up against a system that sometimes valued efficiency over compassion. For now, Ranger and Smudge were safe, clean, and fed. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but Hollis was ready to face them. She had already chosen her side in this fight, and she wouldn't back down until she knew these 2 survivors had their fair chance at a happy ending. The morning light filtered through the shelter windows as Hollis prepared for her daily cleaning routine with Ranger and Smudge. Her movements were gentle and methodical as she gathered fresh towels, cleaning supplies, and a brush. The night's rest had done the pair good. They seemed more settled now, though still wary. "Good morning, you two," Hollis said softly, approaching their kennel. Ranger's tail gave a slight wag of recognition, while Smudge peered out from behind the larger dog's protective form. Their unusual bond touched something in Hollis's heart. She started with Smudge, carefully lifting the tiny grey kitten onto the grooming table. As she ran a soft brush through his fur, something caught her eye. A faint pink powder dusted through his whiskers, standing out against the grey. Hollis frowned, leaning closer. It wasn't the typical dirt or debris she usually cleaned off shelter animals. The color was distinctive, almost artificial. "What have you gotten into, little one?" she murmured, collecting a small sample of the powder in a paper towel before continuing to clean him. Her years working at the shelter had taught her to document anything unusual, even if it seemed insignificant at the time. Moving on to Ranger, she spoke to him in low, soothing tones as she began checking him over. The German Shepherd remained perfectly still, his training evident in his composed demeanor. As she carefully cleaned around his ears, something caught her attention, a faded tattoo barely visible beneath his fur. Hollis's breath caught as she recognized the alphanumeric format. It was a county search and rescue identification mark, the kind they used to use before budget cuts had eliminated the program 3 years ago. The morning's quiet was suddenly interrupted by voices in the corridor. Hollis heard Martha, the front desk clerk, speaking in unusually deferential tones. "Right this way, Commissioner Truitt. We appreciate you taking the time to come down here personally." The man who swept into the kennel area radiated authority. Conrad Truitt wore an expensive charcoal suit that seemed out of place in the utilitarian shelter environment. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his shoes gleamed, and his smile carried the practiced charm of someone used to getting his way. "Good morning," he said smoothly, though his eyes were sharp as they took in the scene. "I understand you've had some recent arrivals in the area?" Before Hollis could respond, she felt Ranger go completely rigid under her hands. The change was instant and dramatic. Every muscle in the dog's body tensed, though he remained eerily silent. Hollis kept one steadying hand on him as she turned to face Truitt. "Commissioner," she acknowledged carefully. "Yes, we had 2 new intakes yesterday morning, this shepherd and a kitten." As she spoke, her mind was racing. The license plate she'd glimpsed on that speeding pickup in the pre-dawn darkness. It was the same one now visible through the window, attached to the gleaming black truck in the shelter's parking lot. "Concerning business," Truitt said, shaking his head with what appeared to be genuine worry. "We've had reports of strays causing problems around several of my salvage sites. Can't have animals interfering with county business, you understand. Safety concerns, liability issues." He waved a manicured hand dismissively. Hollis felt her throat tighten. "These 2 were found abandoned in a duffel bag on Route 27, she said, watching his face carefully. "Not running loose." Something flickered in Truitt's eyes, so brief she might have missed it if she hadn't been looking. "Nevertheless," he continued smoothly, "it's important we address any potential issues. I trust you'll handle things appropriately." The slight emphasis he placed on the last word made it clear what he meant. Throughout the exchange, Hollis was acutely aware of her co-workers hovering nearby, their body language making it clear they wished she would stop questioning someone as important as Commissioner Truitt. She could feel their disapproval, their desire to distance themselves from any controversy. As Truitt turned to leave, he paused in the doorway. "Oh, and do keep me informed of any other strays that turn up. It's important we maintain proper oversight." His smile didn't reach his eyes. After he left, the isolation was immediate. Her co-workers found reasons to be busy elsewhere, avoiding her gaze. Only Ephraim Cole, who'd stopped by to drop off some donated supplies, seemed willing to meet her eyes. The broad-shouldered tow operator lingered after the others had scattered. "You okay?" he asked quietly, watching as Hollis documented Truitt's visit in the shelter's logbook with slightly shaking hands. "Something's not right, Ephraim," she confided, keeping her voice low. "Ranger, he's trained. Look at how he holds himself, how he responds to commands. And that tattoo in his ear. He was part of the county's search and rescue program. Why would a trained dog like that end up dumped in a bag on the side of the road?" Ephraim studied Ranger thoughtfully. "I've seen enough working dogs to know what you mean," he said. "That's no stray." "What are you thinking?" Hollis carefully pulled out her phone and took several clear photos of the tattoo in Ranger's ear. "I'm thinking this stopped being about simple cruelty the moment Commissioner Truitt showed up asking about strays near his salvage sites." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the paper towel containing the pink powder from Smudge's fur. "And I'm thinking there's a reason these 2 were meant to disappear." "Survey powder," Ephraim said immediately, recognizing the distinctive pink color. They use it to mark property lines and construction sites. Hollis felt a chill run down her spine as pieces started falling into place. This wasn't just about abandoned animals anymore. The tattoo connecting Ranger to the county, the survey powder, Truitt's thinly veiled threats, and that truck she'd seen speeding away, it all pointed to something bigger, something darker. "You believe me?" she asked Ephraim, realizing how much she needed at least one person to trust her instincts. "Always have," he replied simply. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" Hollis looked at Ranger and Smudge, then at the evidence she'd gathered. Her initial suspicion of animal cruelty had shifted into something more complex and dangerous, a cover-up that someone powerful wanted to keep hidden. The weight of that knowledge settled heavily on her shoulders, but it also strengthened her resolve. "Document everything," she said firmly, "and keep digging. These two are the key to something bigger, and someone's counting on us just looking the other way." She carefully sealed the paper towel containing the pink powder in an envelope, tucking it securely away with her other evidence. Through it all, Ranger watched her with intelligent eyes that seemed to hold their own secrets, while Smudge curled trustingly against him. Looking at them, Hollis knew with absolute certainty that she was making the right choice, no matter how isolated it might make her. Sometimes doing the right thing meant standing alone, or nearly alone, she amended, grateful for Ephraim's steady presence. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the shelter windows. In the harsh light of day, the implications of what she'd discovered seemed both clearer and more daunting. Commissioner Truitt's polished exterior couldn't quite hide the threat he represented, and his carefully worded warnings echoed in her mind. But Hollis had made her decision. She would follow this trail wherever it led, protecting Ranger and Smudge while unraveling whatever truth they had accidentally stumbled into. Something bigger than all of them was at stake, and it had left its marks, in a faded tattoo, in pink survey powder, and in the frightened rigidity of a trained dog who recognized a threat. Hollis would find out what it was, no matter the cost. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Ephraim's tow truck as it rumbled down the dusty county road. Hollis sat in the passenger seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while Ranger perched alertly between them. The German shepherd's ears were pricked forward, his scarred face intent on the road ahead. "You sure about this?" Ephraim asked, his weathered hands steady on the wheel. "That farm's been nothing but ash for nearly 2 weeks now." "Ranger's training is still there," Hollis said quietly. "The way he reacted to Truitt, the surveyor powder on Smudge, it all points to something bigger. We just need to follow his lead." They turned onto a narrow gravel drive marked by a crooked mailbox. The burnt remains of the Wilkins farm came into view, a stark skeleton of charred beams and collapsed metal roofing where a barn had once stood. Yellow caution tape fluttered weakly from a few remaining posts. Ranger's posture changed instantly. His muscles tensed and his nose worked the air coming through the truck's open window. A low whine built in his throat. "Look at him," Hollis whispered. "He knows this place." Ephraim parked the truck on the public access road, careful to stay off private property. "We'll stick to what we can see from here. No sense getting ourselves in trouble for trespassing." Hollis nodded, pulling out her phone to document everything. Ranger practically vibrated with contained energy beside her. The moment she opened the door, he leaped down and made a beeline for the ruins, staying just within the boundary of the road's shoulder. "Careful now," Ephraim called, coming around to join her. "That dog's got something specific in mind." They watched as Ranger moved with eerie precision along the edge of the property. His nose worked constantly, tracking an invisible path through the air. It was nothing like the random sniffing of a curious dog. This was trained behavior, methodical and purposeful. "He's searching," Hollis realized, just like he was trained to do in the county program. But what's he looking for? The answer came when a gust of wind scattered some loose debris. Among the ash and twisted metal, something white fluttered. Ranger barked sharply, once. Ephraim squinted. "There's paper over there. Looks like it blew right to the property line." Hollis approached carefully, phone camera ready. Several scraps of partially burned paper had collected against a fallen fence post. She photographed them exactly as they lay before gently picking them up. "These are appraisal sheets," she said, turning the fragments carefully. "Look, there's a letterhead. Truitt Estate Services. And these items, they're all listed as lost to fire." "Mighty convenient documentation," Ephraim muttered. They worked their way along the property line, photographing everything visible from the road. Ranger continued his methodical sweep, leading them to more evidence, a snapped lock hasp lying in plain view, its metal twisted and blackened. Why would a barn need that kind of heavy-duty lock? Hollis wondered aloud, zooming in with her camera. This isn't the kind of thing you'd use to keep cattle in. Back in the truck, she spread out a collection of local auction flyers she'd gathered. Her fingers traced dates and locations, matching them against a list of recent fires she'd pulled from county records. "Look at this pattern," she said, voice tight with discovery. "The Wilkins farm burns on March 10th. 3 weeks later, Truitt holds an estate auction featuring salvaged antiques and farm equipment. The Anderson place goes up April 2nd. Another auction follows. The timing, the locations, they're all connected to his business." Ephraim leaned over to study the papers, his expression grim. "This isn't just bad luck or neglect. This is organized, systematic." Ranger pressed against Hollis's leg, his dark eyes fixed on the burnt ruins. She reached down to scratch his ears, noting how he trembled slightly. "You've seen this before, haven't you, boy?" she murmured. "That's why they wanted to get rid of you and Smudge. You were witnesses." A distant engine sound made them all tense. Without a word, Ephraim started the truck and carefully turned around. "We've got what we came for," he said quietly. "Best not push our luck." As they drove away, Hollis stared at the evidence scattered across her lap. The charred appraisal sheets, the photographs, the damning pattern of dates and locations. Her hands shook slightly as she gathered everything into a folder. "The scale of it," she whispered. "How long has this been going on? How many properties? How much money?" "Question is," Ephraim replied, eyes steady on the road, "what do we do with what we know?" Ranger settled between them again, his posture gradually relaxing as they put distance between themselves and the burn site. But his alertness remained, head swiveling to track movement in the fields they passed. He was still on duty, still protecting, still carrying the training that had made him a threat to someone powerful enough to try to silence him. Hollis clutched the folder closer. The weight of their discovery pressed against her chest like smoke. This wasn't just about saving 2 animals anymore. They'd stumbled onto something much bigger, a scheme of destruction and profit that had been hiding in plain sight, marked by ash and documented in convenient losses. "We need to be smart about this," she said finally. "Careful. One wrong move and—" She didn't finish the thought. She didn't have to. The memory of that duffel bag in the pre-dawn road was warning enough of what happened to inconvenient evidence in their county. Ephraim nodded, understanding in his silence. They drove on through the lengthening shadows, each lost in thought about the magnitude of what they'd discovered. Ranger kept his vigil between them, a living link between the truth they'd found and the danger that truth represented. The remaining daylight faded behind them, painting the sky in colors reminiscent of fire. In the gathering dusk, Hollis began mentally mapping out their next steps. They had evidence now, fragile, fragmentary, but real. The question was how to use it without getting burned themselves. Hollis's hands trembled slightly as she spread the documents across Deputy Fire Marshal Thompson's desk. The timeline she'd pieced together, photos of the surveyor powder in Smudge's fur, snapshots of Ranger's ear tattoo, and the pattern of suspicious fires tied to Truitt's auctions. It all seemed so clear to her now. "I know how this might sound," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "But these aren't just coincidences. The timing of the fires, the way they align with Truitt's estate sales." She pointed to the dates she'd carefully marked on a local map. Deputy Marshal Thompson, a seasoned investigator with graying temples and tired eyes, studied the materials with practiced detachment. He picked up one of the photos, squinting at the pink powder visible in Smudge's whiskers. "Miss Keene," he said finally, setting the photo down, "I appreciate the work you've put into this. But we need more than intuition here. Probable cause requires concrete evidence, something that would hold up in court." Hollis felt her heart sink, but she refused to let her disappointment show. "I understand. What kind of evidence would you need?" "Direct witnesses. Documentation linking Truitt to the fires, physical evidence of accelerants or tampering." He gathered her materials into a neat pile. "Right now, all we have is circumstantial connections and a rescued animal with surveyor powder on it. That's not enough for a warrant." "But someone tried to get rid of these animals?" Hollis pressed. "They were abandoned in a duffel bag in the middle of the road." Thompson's expression softened slightly. "Keep looking. Document everything. If you find anything concrete, anything that directly ties Truitt to criminal activity, bring it to me immediately. But please be careful. If what you suspect is true, these aren't people to trifle with." Hollis nodded, gathering her materials. "I'll keep you updated. Thank you for your time." The drive back to the shelter felt longer than usual. The autumn evening was settling in early, bringing a chill to the air that matched Hollis's mood. She kept replaying Thompson's words in her mind. They needed proof, real, solid evidence that would stand up in court. It was nearly 9 o'clock when she pulled into the shelter's parking lot. The building was quiet at this hour, most of the staff gone home except for the night crew. Hollis used her key card to enter through the side door, heading straight for the kennel area where Ranger and Smudge were housed together. The familiar sounds and smells of the shelter at night normally brought her comfort, but something felt off. The air seemed thicker, tenser. As she rounded the corner to the main kennel area, she heard voices, angry ones. "I got my orders," a gruff male voice insisted. "That aggressive dog needs to be removed. Now." Hollis recognized the speaker, Jake Morton, Truitt's foreman. He was facing off with Tommy, the night security guard, who looked thoroughly intimidated despite his uniform. "Sir, we can't release any animals without proper authorization," Tommy was saying, his voice wavering. Hollis stepped forward, her heart pounding. "What's going on here?" Morton's head snapped toward her, his expression darkening. "Got papers here saying that German Shepherd's dangerous, needs to be put down tonight." "Those papers would need to come through proper channels," Hollis said firmly, though her hands were shaking. "Through animal control, not a private citizen." "Listen, lady." Morton took a threatening step forward. "That dog's going with me one way or another." The next few moments happened in a blur. Morton shoved past Tommy, heading for the kennel area. Hollis moved to block his path, but he was faster, stronger. As he pushed her aside, his elbow caught the fire alarm on the wall. Immediately, the shelter erupted into chaos. The piercing shriek of alarms filled the air as the emergency sprinkler system activated, sending sheets of water cascading down. Dogs began barking frantically in their kennels, the sound echoing off the walls. Through the chaos, Hollis saw Morton advancing toward Ranger and Smudge's enclosure. She fumbled for her phone, hitting Ephraim's number on speed dial. "The shelter! Now!" was all she managed to say before the phone slipped from her wet hands. Morton was at the kennel door now, fumbling with the latch. Ranger stood protectively in front of Smudge, his hackles raised, a low growl emanating from his throat. The water had soaked through Hollis's clothes as she rushed forward, but she barely noticed the cold. "Stop!" she shouted. "You have no right, Dash!" A new sound cut through the cacophony, heavy footsteps running toward them. Ephraim appeared, his broad frame filling the corridor. He must have already been nearby when she called. "Step away from that kennel!" Ephraim's voice boomed, carrying authority that made even Morton hesitate. The foreman's face twisted with rage, but he was outnumbered now. Water continued to pour from the sprinklers, and smoke was beginning to curl under one of the doors. Something must have shorted out in the electrical system. "This isn't over," Morton snarled, backing away. He turned and disappeared down the wet corridor, leaving chaos in his wake. "We need to get them out of here," Ephraim said, already moving to help Hollis with the kennel door. "The fire department will be here any minute, and we can't let them find Ranger and Smudge." Hollis nodded, her hand steady now as she opened the enclosure. Ranger came immediately to her side, while Ephraim scooped up Smudge. They made their way through the wet corridors, past frightened animals and confused staff members. The smoke was getting thicker, though no flames were visible. They emerged into the cool night air just as fire trucks began pulling into the parking lot, their lights painting the scene in surreal flashes of red. Without discussion, they headed for Ephraim's truck, parked in the shadows at the edge of the lot. As they drove away, Hollis held Smudge close while Ranger pressed against her legs. Her clothes were soaked, her heart was racing, but her mind was clear. The animals weren't just victims of circumstance anymore. They were targets. Someone wanted them silenced, which meant they were evidence of something bigger than she'd imagined. "My place," Ephraim said firmly, taking a turn that would lead them to his house on the outskirts of town. "You'll all be safe there while we figure out our next move." Hollis looked down at Ranger and Smudge, then out at the night rushing past her window. The comfortable routine of her life at the shelter had just been shattered, but there was no going back now. These animals needed her, and she needed to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. As they drove through the darkness, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a steely determination. Thompson wanted concrete evidence? She would find it. But first she had to keep Ranger and Smudge safe. They were more than just rescued animals now. They were living proof of something dangerous, something that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. The gravel crunched beneath the tow truck's tires as Ephraim guided the vehicle along the winding back road. The setting sun painted long shadows across the pavement, and a cool autumn breeze rustled through the trees lining both sides of the narrow country lane. In the passenger seat, Hollis held Smudge close, while Ranger sat alert between them, his ears perked forward and nose twitching at the air coming through the cracked window. "Thanks again for helping me get them out of there," Hollis said quietly, scratching behind Smudge's ears. The little grey kitten had finally stopped trembling, though his fur still carried the acrid smell of smoke from the shelter incident. Ephraim nodded, his weathered hands steady on the wheel. "Wasn't right what that foreman tried to pull. Breaking in like that, something's definitely not adding up with Truitt and his people." The old bridge came into view ahead, a metal span across Willow Creek that had seen better days. Yellow warning signs marked a reduced weight limit, and patches of rust spotted the guardrails. Hollis had driven across it hundreds of times on her way to and from the shelter, but tonight the sight of it made her uneasy. That's when she saw it in the side mirror, a black SUV gaining on them fast, its headlights blazing. "Ephraim!" She started to warn, but the impact cut her words short. The SUV slammed into their rear bumper with a thunderous crash of metal on metal. The tow truck lurched forward, tires squealing as Ephraim fought to maintain control. "Hold on!" he shouted, muscles straining against the wheel as the SUV rammed them again. The truck skidded sideways, scraping against the bridge's guardrail with a horrific shriek of tortured metal. Sparks flew as the rail began to give way under the pressure. The cab tilted precariously toward the creek below. Hollis's heart hammered in her chest as she clutched the dashboard. In the chaos, Smudge squirmed free of her grip and disappeared through the gap near the footwell. "Smudge!" Hollis cried out. Without thinking, she dove after the kitten, reaching desperately into the dark space beneath the seat. The truck's chassis groaned ominously, metal protesting as more of the rail bent outward. Ranger's training kicked in instantly. The German shepherd lunged forward, powerful jaws clamping firmly but gently around the collar of Hollis's jacket. With surprising strength, he began pulling her back, away from the tilting edge of the cab and toward the relative safety of the driver's side. Through the windshield, Hollis caught a glimpse of the culvert below, a 15-foot drop to the rocky creek bed. The truck's rear bumper scraped against empty air as the rail continued to fail. One wrong move would send them plummeting over the edge. Time seemed to slow down. She could feel Ranger's determined tugging, hear Ephraim's steady stream of curses as he wrestled with the wheel, smell the burning rubber of their tires trying to find purchase on the gravel. Then, miraculously, she felt something soft brush against her searching fingers. Smudge wedged against the floor mat. She scooped up the terrified kitten just as Ranger gave one final powerful pull, dragging them both toward the driver's side door. The black SUV's engine roared as it sped past them and disappeared around the curve ahead, leaving them teetering on the bridge's edge. With a grinding of gears, Ephraim carefully eased the truck backward until all four wheels were firmly on solid ground again. They sat there shaking, the only sounds their ragged breathing and the tick-tick-tick of the cooling engine. "Everyone okay?" Ephraim asked hoarsely, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Hollis nodded, clutching Smudge to her chest while her other hand buried itself in Ranger's fur. The German shepherd pressed close against her side, his body trembling slightly, but his posture still alert and protective. "They tried to kill us," she whispered, the reality of it sinking in. "They actually tried to push us off the bridge." Ephraim's jaw clenched as he surveyed the damage in his side mirror. Wasn't random either. They knew we'd be on this road. Hollis looked down at the animals, Smudge still shaking in her arms, Ranger's watchful eyes fixed on the road ahead. The truth hit her like another physical blow. The duffel bag on the road that night. They weren't just abandoning them to die, they were trying to get rid of evidence. Her mind raced back to everything they'd discovered. The surveyor's powder in Smudge's fur, Ranger's search and rescue tattoo, the suspicious pattern of fires and auctions. These animals were living proof of something bigger, something dangerous enough that someone would try to murder them all to keep it quiet. She scratched behind Ranger's ears, remembering how he'd just saved her life without hesitation. "Good boy," she murmured. "Such a good, brave boy." The German shepherd's tail wagged once, but he maintained his protective stance. His training was evident in every line of his body. This wasn't just an abandoned dog. This was a professional partner who had recovered his purpose. Hollis straightened in her seat, her fear transforming into cold determination. "We need evidence," she said firmly. "The kind they can't just burn or make disappear. Something concrete that will make the fire marshal's office take notice." Ephraim nodded slowly, finally releasing his death grip on the steering wheel. "My truck's got a dash cam," he said. "Got a good look at that SUV, including the license plate when it passed us." "That's a start," Hollis agreed. She looked down at Ranger and Smudge, these unlikely survivors who had become so much more than just animals in need of rescue. They were partners now, bound together by shared danger and mutual protection. "We'll need somewhere safe to stay tonight," Ephraim said, carefully turning the truck around. "Can't risk going back to your place or the shelter." "I know a place," Hollis replied, her mind already working on their next steps. The attempt on their lives had only strengthened her resolve. Someone had tried to silence them, but they'd failed. Now it was time to gather the kind of evidence that would make sure justice was served, for the animals, for the property owners who'd lost everything in those suspicious fires, and for everyone else Truitt and his cronies had hurt along the way. As they drove away from the bridge, Hollis kept one hand on Ranger's sturdy shoulder and the other cradling Smudge. The little family they'd become might not have been conventional, but it was real. And together they were going to expose the truth, no matter what it took. The morning sun cast long shadows across the charred remains of the old barn as Hollis and Ephraim returned to the burned farm. Their footsteps crunched on the ash-covered ground, stirring up small clouds of soot with each careful step. Ranger walked ahead of them, his nose working overtime as he methodically traced a path through the debris. "You sure about this?" Ephraim asked, glancing nervously over his shoulder. His weathered face showed concern as he adjusted his worn baseball cap. "Truitt's got eyes everywhere." "We need real proof," Hollis replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "After what happened at the bridge—" She didn't finish the sentence. The memory of hanging over that dark void, with only Ranger's grip on her jacket keeping her and Smudge from falling, was still too fresh. Smudge was safely tucked into a padded carrier that Hollis held in one hand, while her phone was ready in the other. The little grey kitten peered out through the mesh, his fur still bearing traces of that peculiar pink powder they'd noticed before. Ranger suddenly stopped at what remained of the barn's foundation. His posture changed, alert, focused, just like they'd seen him do before when his old training kicked in. He began pawing intently at a section of the foundation where a sill plate had come loose in the fire. "Hold up," Hollis said, setting down Smudge's carrier carefully. She crouched beside Ranger, her heart beginning to pound as she examined the area he was so interested in. The German Shepherd's behavior was too deliberate to be random. Ephraim joined them, pulling out a small flashlight from his pocket. "There's something under there," he said, directing the beam into the gap Ranger had found. "Looks like some kind of storage space." Together, they carefully pulled away the loosened sill plate. The space beneath was like a small cellar, protected from the fire that had consumed the barn above. Hollis's breath caught in her throat as the flashlight beam revealed several plastic jugs pushed far back into the hidden compartment. "Accelerant," Ephraim whispered, his face grim. "Professional-grade stuff too, not something you'd find at the hardware store." But it was what lay beside the jugs that made Hollis's hands shake as she reached for it. A leather-bound ledger, its cover unmarked, but its pages filled with neat handwriting and numbers. She began photographing everything methodically: the jugs, their labels, their position under the foundation. Then she opened the ledger, and each turn of the page revealed more damning evidence. Column after column listed items under the heading "Precondition Losses," complete with values and lot numbers. "Look at these numbers," she said, her voice barely above a whisper as she continued taking photos. "They match the lot numbers from Truitt's auctions." "Every single one." Ephraim leaned in closer, his expression darkening as he understood what they were seeing. "He's been planning these fires, cataloguing what would be lost before they even happened." Hollis sat back on her heels, her mind racing as pieces began falling into place. She pulled out the sample of pink powder she'd collected from Smudge's fur and compared it to a marking on one of the ledger's pages, a stamp that read "Truitt Estate Services" in the exact same shade of pink. "The surveyor chalk," she said, her voice growing stronger with certainty. "They use it to mark properties for assessment. That's why Smudge had it in his fur. He and Ranger were there when they were marking the next target." She turned to look at Ranger, who sat watching them with those intelligent eyes. The tattoo in his ear, those faded numbers she'd photographed earlier, suddenly took on new meaning. "The County Search and Rescue Program," she said, reaching out to gently touch Ranger's ear. "It was cut 2 years ago. Budget decisions made by the county commissioner." "Truitt," Ephraim finished, his jaw clenching. "Ranger would have been trained to find people in burning buildings. He would have known how to track accelerants, how to identify fire scenes." Hollis's voice grew harder as the full picture emerged. "He was a liability. They all were, the whole program. So Truitt shut it down, scattered the evidence." She looked at the ledger again, at the meticulous records of profits from items that were supposed to have been destroyed. "He engineers the fires, makes sure certain valuable items are removed beforehand, then auctions them off through his estate service. The original owners get their insurance money for the lost items, and Truitt profits from selling them again." Ranger whined softly, pressing against her leg. In his carrier, Smudge mewed, as if adding his own testimony to the evidence before them. "These animals weren't just abandoned," Hollis said, her hand tightening on the ledger. "They were witnesses." Ranger would have recognized the accelerant, known the pattern. And Smudge. She looked at the pink-tinged fur visible through the carrier mesh. He was literally carrying the evidence on him. That's why they tried to get rid of them at the shelter, Ephraim said, and why they ran us off the bridge when that didn't work. Hollis stood slowly, clutching the ledger. Her hands had stopped shaking. The fear that had been her constant companion since finding Ranger and Smudge in that duffel bag was transforming into something else. Determination. What had started as an effort to save 2 abandoned animals had become something much bigger. "We need to get these photos to the fire marshal's office," she said, already backing away from the Foundation. "And we need to make copies of everything. Multiple copies, stored in different places. Things have a way of disappearing around Truitt." Ephraim nodded, helping her gather their evidence. "What about them?" he asked, nodding toward Ranger and Smudge. Hollis looked at her unlikely companions, the trained search dog who had saved her life and the tiny kitten who carried damning evidence in his fur. "They're coming with us," she said firmly. "They're not just victims anymore. They're proof." They carefully replaced the sill plate, trying to leave no sign of their discovery. As they walked back to Ephraim's truck, Hollis felt the weight of the ledger in her bag, heavy with more than just paper. What had seemed like scattered suspicious circumstances had crystallized into something concrete and undeniable. The sun was higher now, burning away the morning mist and illuminating the charred bones of the barn. Hollis looked back at the scene, seeing it with new eyes. Every fire, every auction, every unfortunate loss. They were all connected, all part of a scheme that had cost people their homes and livelihoods, all while making Truitt richer. In the truck's cab, Ranger sat at attention, his eyes scanning the road ahead, while Smudge curled up in his carrier, the pink dust in his fur now a silent accusation against those who had tried to silence them both. The evidence was clear, the pattern undeniable. The only question now was what Truitt would do when he realized his carefully constructed facade was about to come crashing down. Here's a 5,452-plus word continuation focused on the strategic trap setting with the fire marshal. The sun cast long shadows across Hollis's kitchen table as she spread out the photographs of the ledger, her hands trembling slightly from a mix of exhaustion and determination. She had spent the entire night making digital copies, her printer humming steadily as she created multiple backups of the damning evidence. Each image told part of the story, lot numbers, dates, and dollar amounts that painted a clear picture of Truitt's scheme. Her phone buzzed, displaying the fire marshal's number. Taking a deep breath, she answered. "Marshal Thompson?" "Yes, I've got everything documented." "Good work, Keen." The marshal's gravelly voice came through clearly. "I've reviewed what you sent. Those ledger entries match perfectly with our incident reports. We finally have enough for a proper investigation." Hollis felt a weight lift from her shoulders. After days of being dismissed and doubted, having official validation meant everything. "So what's our next move?" "We need to catch him in the act," Thompson replied. "Right now, all we have is circumstantial evidence, but if we can document him attempting to silence witnesses or destroy evidence..." He let the implications hang in the air. "You want to use Ranger and Smudge as bait," Hollis stated flatly, watching as the animals dozed together on her living room rug. The German shepherd's head rested protectively near the little grey kitten. "Not exactly," Thompson corrected. "We want to use the idea of them as bait. Make Truitt think he has an opportunity he can't pass up." Over the next hour, they hammered out the details of their plan. The fire marshal's office would leak information about an upcoming transfer of the aggressive German shepherd to a specialized facility. The story would be that due to liability concerns, the shelter needed to move the dangerous dog before any incidents occurred. "We'll make it look sloppy," Thompson explained. "An obvious transport route, minimal security, perfect for an intercept. If Truitt's as arrogant as he seems, he'll want to handle this personally." Hollis nodded, jotting down notes. "We'll need Ephraim's help." His tow yard would be the perfect staging area. "Agreed. Get him on board, but keep this quiet. The fewer people who know, the better." After ending the call, Hollis drove to Ephraim's tow yard. The familiar scent of motor oil and rubber filled the air as she pulled up beside his office. She found him beneath a lifted pickup truck, his broad shoulders straining against his work shirt as he wrestled with a stubborn bolt. "Hey," she called out. "Got a minute?" Ephraim rolled out from under the truck, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "For you." Always. His kind eyes crinkled with concern as he took in her serious expression. "What's wrong?" Hollis explained the fire marshal's plan while they walked through the yard. Ephraim listened intently, occasionally nodding as she outlined their strategy. "So you want to use my yard as the staging area?" he asked, surveying the sprawling lot surrounded by chain-link fence. "It makes sense," Hollis replied. "You've got security cameras, good sight lines, and multiple access points we can control. Plus, you're just outside the city limits, which gives the fire marshal's office jurisdiction." Ephraim was quiet for a long moment, then said, "I've got something that might help." He led her to his personal truck, a well-maintained Ford F-150, and pointed to a small device mounted on the dashboard. "Just installed this high-end dashcam last week. Records in full HD, has night vision, and uploads automatically to cloud storage." Hollis felt a smile spread across her face. "That's perfect. We can document everything from multiple angles." They spent the next few hours preparing the yard. Ephraim adjusted camera positions while Hollis mapped out the most obvious transport route, one that would take them past several isolated stretches of road where an ambush would be tempting. "We'll need to practice," Hollis said, tracing the route on a map spread across Ephraim's desk. "Make it look routine, like we're just following standard procedure." "Already on it," Ephraim replied, pulling out a set of keys. "Let's do a dry run." They drove the route 3 times, noting potential vulnerability points and escape routes. Each time, Hollis felt more confident in their plan. The route they chose had enough isolated stretches to tempt Truitt, but also enough alternate paths to ensure they wouldn't be trapped. Back at her apartment, Hollis focused on protecting the evidence. She created multiple copies of the ledger images, storing them on separate drives. Some went into a safety deposit box at her bank, others to secure cloud storage, and one set to her sister 2 states away. "Can't burn what he can't find," she muttered, watching as the final upload completed. Ranger padded over and laid his head on her lap, his brown eyes full of trust. Smudge, not to be left out, jumped onto the desk and curled up next to her keyboard. Hollis scratched behind Ranger's ears, feeling the raised scar tissue that marked him as a survivor. "I won't let anything happen to you," she promised both animals. "You'll never be alone." The next morning, Hollis met with Marshal Thompson and his team at a quiet diner outside town. The marshal had positioned his units carefully, taking into account jurisdictional boundaries while ensuring they could respond quickly if needed. "My people will be in plain clothes, driving unmarked vehicles," Thompson explained, pointing to locations on a map. "We'll have eyes on you the whole time, but we'll stay far enough back that we won't spook Truitt." "What about response time?" Hollis asked, stirring her untouched coffee. 4 minutes max to any point along the route," Thompson assured her. "We've run the drills. The moment Truitt makes a move, we'll be there." "And you're sure the leak will reach him?" Thompson smiled grimly. "Already has. Our source in his office confirms he was asking questions about the transfer within an hour of us placing the call." Hollis felt her pulse quicken. The trap was set, but now came the dangerous part, waiting to see if Truitt would take the bait. Over the next few days, Hollis maintained her normal routine while carefully monitoring any signs of surveillance. She noticed a black SUV parked across from the shelter during her shifts and occasionally glimpsed one of Truitt's known associates driving past Ephraim's yard. "They're watching," she told Ephraim during another practice run, "getting bolder about it too." Ephraim nodded, his hands steady on the wheel as they drove their planned route. "Good. Means they're getting confident. Overconfident people make mistakes." The dashcam recorded each practice session, its small red light a constant reminder of their purpose. They had rigged additional cameras in strategic locations around the yard and along their route, ensuring that whatever happened would be documented from multiple angles. As the day of the planned transfer approached, Hollis felt the tension building. She checked and rechecked their preparations, running through contingency plans in her mind. The animals seemed to sense her anxiety. Ranger stayed especially close, while Smudge became more vocal, demanding attention with insistent meows. The evening before the transfer, Hollis sat in her living room, going over the plan one final time. Her phone buzzed with a text from Thompson. Source confirms T called emergency board meeting. Says he's handling a situation tomorrow. Be ready. Hollis took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. Everything was in place. The evidence was secured, the cameras were ready, and Thompson's teams were positioned. Now they just needed Truitt to show his hand. He'll come himself, she said aloud, more certain than ever. His ego won't let him trust this to anyone else. Ranger lifted his head at the sound of her voice, ears perked forward attentively. Smudge curled up against the dog's side, opened one eye lazily before going back to sleep. Looking at them, Hollis felt her resolve strengthen. They had survived Truitt's attempts to silence them once. This time, they would do more than survive. They would help bring him down. She spent the rest of the evening going through her final preparations. The transport carrier was ready, lined with familiar blankets to help keep the animals calm. She had packed a small bag with essential supplies, including copies of all necessary paperwork to make the transfer look legitimate. Ephraim called just before midnight. "Everything's set at the yard," he reported. "Cameras are all working, backup power is ready, and I've got eyes on all approaches. You should try to get some sleep." "You too," Hollis replied, knowing neither of them would rest much tonight. "See you at 6. She tried to sleep, but found herself getting up every hour to check on Ranger and Smudge. The animals had taken to sleeping in her room since the bridge incident, providing both comfort and an early warning system. Ranger's keen senses had already alerted her to several drive-bys in the past week. As dawn approached, Hollis felt surprisingly calm. The fear and uncertainty of the past days had crystallized into clear purpose. They had planned everything carefully, taken every precaution. Now it was time to see if Truitt's arrogance would finally be his undoing. She dressed in her usual work clothes, wanting everything to look as normal as possible. The transport papers were tucked into her bag, along with her phone and a small GPS tracker Thompson had provided. Ranger and Smudge watched her preparations with interest, seemingly aware that something important was happening. "Ready for a ride?" she asked them, trying to keep her voice light and casual. Ranger's tail wagged slowly, while Smudge let out a small chirp. The pre-dawn air was crisp as Hollis loaded the animals into her car. She took a moment to check the dashcam Ephraim had installed, ensuring it was recording properly. The small device felt like a shield, knowing that whatever happened next would be documented. As she pulled out of her driveway, Hollis spotted a familiar black SUV parked 2 blocks away. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel, but she maintained her speed and direction. Let them think they were being subtle. Let them think they had the advantage. The streets were quiet as she drove to Ephraim's yard, following their practiced route. In her rearview mirror, she could see the SUV maintaining its distance. They were being followed, just as expected. Ephraim was waiting when she arrived, his truck already warmed up and ready. They transferred the animals to his vehicle efficiently, making it look routine while ensuring both Ranger and Smudge were secure and comfortable. "Spotted our tail?" Ephraim asked quietly as he helped her with the carrier. "Black SUV, 2 blocks back," Hollis confirmed. "They're not even trying to hide anymore." "Good," Ephraim said, his voice grim but determined. "Let's give them what they're waiting for." They did one final check of their equipment and preparations. The dashcam was recording, their phones were charged, and Thompson's teams were in position along the route. Everything was ready. As they prepared to pull out of the yard, Hollis sent a quick text to Thompson. "Show time." The response came immediately. "All units in position. Good luck." Hollis took her place in the passenger seat, while Ephraim started the engine. In the back, Ranger and Smudge settled into their familiar traveling positions, the dog alert and watchful, the cat curled up against his side. "Remember," Hollis said softly as they pulled onto the main road, "they're not just bait. We protect them no matter what." Ephraim nodded, his eyes scanning the road ahead. "No matter what," he agreed. The trap was set. Now they would see if Truett's confidence would lead him into making the mistake they needed to document. As they drove into the growing morning light, Hollis silently prayed they had planned for every possibility. Behind them, the black SUV pulled out to follow, keeping its distance but maintaining a steady presence. The game was on, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Everything now depended on Truett taking the bait, and them being ready when he did. The night air hung heavy with anticipation as the convoy of vehicles rolled down the quiet country road. Hollis sat in Ephraim's tow truck, her heart pounding against her ribs. Ranger pressed close against her leg, his muscled body tense and alert. Tiny Smudge was curled up in a carrier between them, letting out occasional soft mews. "You doing okay?" Ephraim asked, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The dashboard clock read 11:15 at night. "As ready as I'll ever be," Hollis replied, trying to keep her voice steady. She reached down to scratch behind Ranger's ears, drawing comfort from his solid presence. The red dashcam light blinked steadily on the windshield, recording everything. Hollis had checked it 3 times before they left. That little red light represented hope. Hope that they could finally expose Truett's crimes. They turned onto the gravel drive leading to Ephraim's tow yard. The headlights swept across the familiar chain-link fence and rows of impounded vehicles. But something was wrong. A black SUV blocked the main gate, its engine idling. "That's Truett's vehicle," Hollis whispered, her mouth going dry. Ephraim slowed the truck to a stop, keeping a careful distance. He took the bait all right. Too well. The SUV's doors opened and several figures emerged. Even in the dim light, Hollis recognized Truett's tall frame and expensive suit. His foreman and 2 other men flanked him like shadows. "Cole!" Truett called out, his voice carrying across the yard with false friendliness. "Quite late for business, isn't it?" Ephraim cracked his window just enough to reply. "Never too late for a tow operator. What brings you here, Commissioner?" "Oh, I think you know." Truett's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That aggressive dog you're harboring? The one that should have been put down days ago? Hand it over, and we can all go home." Hollis felt Ranger tense beside her. The German shepherd's ears were pricked forward, but he remained absolutely silent. "The dog's being transferred legally," Ephraim said firmly. "We've got all the paperwork." Truett's pleasant mask slipped for just a moment. He turned to his foreman and spoke in a low voice, but the words carried clearly in the night air. "Light the bays. Trap them inside." Horror crashed through Hollis as she saw the foreman and another man sprint toward the repair base. The dashcam's red light blinked steadily, capturing every word. "Ephraim!" she gasped. "I see them." His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Hold on." He threw the truck into reverse just as the first flames erupted along the oil-stained walls of the repair base. The fire spread with frightening speed, feeding on years of absorbed grease and fuel. Thick, black smoke began billowing into the night sky. Truett's men had circled behind them, blocking their retreat. They were trapped between the burning building and the SUV. The smoke rolled across the yard like a living thing, turning the familiar space into a disorienting maze. Hollis could barely see 3 feet in front of her. The acrid fumes burned her throat and made her eyes water. "We have to get out!" she coughed. "The animals dash." A sharp yowl cut through the chaos. Somehow, in all the confusion, Smudge had wiggled free of his carrier. The tiny grey kitten darted away into the smoke-filled yard. "No!" Hollis yanked open her door before Ephraim could stop her. "Smudge!" "Hollis, wait!" Ephraim called after her, but she was already out of the truck. The smoke wrapped around her like a suffocating blanket. She could hear Truitt shouting something in the distance, the crackle of flames growing louder. But none of that mattered. Somewhere in this inferno was a terrified kitten who needed her. She felt Ranger press against her leg, guiding her along the wall of the building. The trained search dog seemed to know exactly what to do. He kept his body low, leading her to pockets of clearer air near the ground. "Smudge," she called, trying not to inhale too deeply. "Here, kitty." The heat was becoming intense. Sweat ran down her face, mixing with tears from the smoke. But she refused to leave without the kitten. She couldn't lose him now, not after everything they'd been through. A familiar mechanical whine cut through the roar of the flames. Ephraim's wrecker winch. There was a screech of protesting metal, then a tremendous crash. He was creating an escape route, tearing down one of the metal panels on the far side of the yard. Ranger suddenly tensed beside her, his nose working the air. He tugged at her jacket, pulling her toward a stack of old tires. There, huddled in the center of one, was a small grey form. "Smudge!" Hollis reached in and scooped up the trembling kitten, clutching him to her chest. "I've got you, baby. I've got you." Ranger led them back through the smoke, staying close to guide them to safety. Hollis could barely breathe, her lungs burning with every step. But she kept moving, trusting the dog's instincts. Finally, mercifully, fresh air hit her face. They had reached the gap Ephraim had created in the wall. She stumbled through it, coughing violently, still holding Smudge tight against her. Ranger stayed right beside her, his fur smoky but otherwise unharmed. Ephraim was there in an instant, supporting her as her legs threatened to give out. "Thank God," he muttered. "I thought—" "Never mind what I thought. You're okay?" Hollis nodded, unable to speak through her coughing. She held up Smudge, showing that the kitten was safe too. In the distance, they could hear sirens approaching. The fire marshal's teams, stationed nearby, were responding to their signal. But more importantly, the dashcam had captured everything: Truitt's presence, his explicit orders to trap them, the deliberate setting of the fire. It was all recorded. When she could finally catch her breath, Hollis looked at the burning building, then at her small family. Ranger standing guard beside her, Smudge purring against her chest despite his fear, and Ephraim's steady presence at her back. They had survived. More than that, they had won this round. The dashcam's memory card was secure, and with it, proof of Truitt's latest crime. The cameras had caught his face, his voice, his direct orders to light the bays. No amount of money or influence could explain that away. But even as relief flooded through her, Hollis knew this wasn't truly over. Truitt would fight back harder than ever now that they had real evidence against him. This was a victory, yes, but the war was far from finished. Emergency vehicles began pulling into the yard, their lights painting the smoke-filled night in rotating red and blue. Fire crews deployed their hoses while police officers secured the scene. Truitt and his men were nowhere to be seen, having fled when they heard the sirens. A paramedic approached Hollis with an oxygen mask, which she accepted gratefully. As she breathed in the clean air, she kept one hand buried in Ranger's fur, and Smudge cradled close. The animals stayed pressed against her, as if they couldn't bear to be separated after coming so close to disaster. "The dashcam," she whispered to Ephraim between breaths. "Safe and sound," he assured her, patting his jacket pocket where the memory card was stored. "Got everything from the moment we pulled in? Crystal clear audio too?" Hollis nodded, relief making her dizzy. Or maybe that was the smoke inhalation. Either way, she allowed herself to be led to a waiting ambulance for proper treatment. Ranger and Smudge refused to leave her side, and the emergency workers, seeing their protective behavior, didn't try to separate them. As she sat on the back of the ambulance, watching firefighters battle the blaze that had nearly claimed their lives, Hollis felt a complex mix of emotions wash over her. They had gathered the evidence they needed, survived Truitt's attempt to silence them, and kept everyone safe. But the look in Truitt's eyes before he fled told her this was just the beginning. He wouldn't go down without a fight, and he still had power and influence on his side. The night's events had proven one thing beyond doubt. Truitt was willing to kill to keep his secrets. The carefully orchestrated trap had worked, but at a terrible risk. They would have to be even more cautious going forward, more strategic in their next moves. For now, though, Hollis focused on breathing, on the warm weight of Smudge in her lap, and Ranger's solid presence beside her. They were alive. They had proof. Everything else could wait until tomorrow. The fire marshal's investigators were already documenting the scene, photographing the evidence of intentional arson. Ephraim stood talking with them, no doubt explaining about the dashcam footage. Red and blue lights continued to flash across the smoke-stained yard, illuminating the destruction Truitt had left in his wake. But he had made a crucial mistake tonight. In his desperation to silence them, he had instead given them exactly what they needed: irrefutable proof of his crimes, captured forever on camera. Sometimes, Hollis reflected, the best victories come disguised as moments of greatest danger. She hugged Smudge closer, feeling his tiny heart beating against her chest, and silently thanked whatever fate had brought these animals into her life. Together, they had uncovered a truth that could no longer be hidden. Now they just had to survive long enough to bring that truth to light. The morning after the fire at Ephraim's yard dawned crisp and clear. Fire Marshal Sandra Chen stood in her office, spreading photos across her desk with methodical precision. The images told a damning story. Hidden jugs of accelerant beneath burned buildings, detailed ledgers listing precondition losses, and crystal-clear dashcam footage of Conrad Truitt ordering his foreman to light the bays. "We've got him," Chen said quietly, reaching for her phone. Within an hour, 3 judges had signed the necessary warrants. The wheels of justice, so long frustrated by Truitt's careful manipulations, began to turn. By 9 o'clock that morning, a convoy of unmarked police vehicles converged on Truitt's private warehouse on the outskirts of town. The massive metal building sat isolated at the end of a long gravel drive, surrounded by security fencing topped with razor wire. Chen had coordinated with the sheriff's department, positioning deputies at strategic points around the perimeter. Hollis watched from her position in Ephraim's tow truck, parked safely back from the action. Ranger sat alert beside her, his ears forward and focused. Smudge was tucked securely in her jacket, purring against her chest. The kitten had become her constant companion, refusing to be left behind. "Remember," Chen had told her, "stay back until we clear the scene. You're here as a witness only." The raid moved with precision. Deputies approached from multiple angles, their movements choreographed through weeks of planning. The warehouse's main door rolled up with a grinding metallic screech as the first team breached the entrance. Inside, the space stretched vast and shadowy. Industrial shelving reached toward the ceiling, loaded with boxes and crates. The air smelled of dust and metal and secrets. "Begin systematic search," Chen ordered through her radio. "Document everything." Teams of deputies moved through the aisles, photographing serial numbers and opening containers. The evidence mounted with each passing minute. Here was an antique grandfather clock reported destroyed in the Martinez farm fire. There sat crates of vintage wine bottles supposedly lost when the old Preston estate burned. Everything meticulously labeled and stored, waiting to resurface at future auctions. "Marshal Chen," called one of the deputies, "you need to see this." In a corner office, they found filing cabinets filled with insurance claim paperwork. Each folder contained detailed inventories of items lost to mysterious fires alongside corresponding insurance payouts. The organization was immaculate and damning. "He kept records of everything," Chen said, shaking her head. "The arrogance of it." The quiet efficiency of the search shattered as a door slammed somewhere in the depths of the warehouse. Heavy footsteps echoed off metal walls. "What the hell is going on here?" Conrad Truitt's voice boomed through the space. He emerged from between 2 rows of shelving, his usual polished appearance somewhat disheveled. In his hands, he gripped a crowbar. "Mr. Truitt," Chen called out, "we have a warrant to search these premises." "Like hell you do," he snarled, advancing toward the nearest deputy. The crowbar rose threateningly. Hollis, who had edged closer to watch despite instructions to stay back, felt Ranger grow tense beside her. The German Shepherd's training kicked in as he assessed the threat. "Drop the weapon, Mr. Truitt," Chen ordered, her voice steady. Instead, Truitt lunged forward, swinging the crowbar in a vicious arc. Deputies scattered, drawing weapons but hesitant to fire in the enclosed space. Ranger moved like lightning. Years of search and rescue training took over as he launched himself forward, targeting Truitt's weapon arm with surgical precision. His powerful jaws clamped down on Truitt's sleeve, not to maim, but to control. The German Shepherd's weight and momentum pulled Truitt off balance. The crowbar clattered to the concrete floor as Ranger executed a perfect hold, keeping the man immobilized without causing serious injury. Deputies swarmed in, securing Truitt's arms behind his back. The click of handcuffs echoed through the warehouse. "Get this damn dog off me!" Truitt shouted. "Ranger, release!" Hollis called softly. The German Shepherd immediately let go and trotted back to her side, head held high. "Conrad Truitt," Chen began. "You're under arrest for multiple counts of arson, insurance fraud, conspiracy." As she continued reading his rights, more deputies arrived with Truitt's foreman in custody. The man's face was ashen as he looked at his boss. "I ain't going down alone for this," the foreman announced. "I'll tell you everything. The properties he had me torch, where the goods went, all of it." Truitt's face contorted with rage. "Keep your mouth shut, you idiot!" But it was too late. The foreman had already started talking, spilling details about years of systematic arson and fraud. Each word he spoke added another nail to the coffin of Truitt's criminal enterprise. Hollis stood back, watching as deputies began boxing up evidence. Ranger sat calmly at her heel, while Smudge purred contentedly in her jacket. The scheme that had nearly cost all their lives was finally crumbling, destroyed by its own meticulous record-keeping. More police vehicles arrived, along with news vans drawn by scanner chatter. Chen coordinated with evidence technicians, ensuring every item was properly documented and secured. The investigation would take weeks to fully unravel, but the hard part was done. Teams of deputies worked methodically through the warehouse, cross-referencing inventory against insurance claims. Each match strengthened the case against Truitt. High-end furniture, artwork, antiques, all carefully preserved despite being reported destroyed. "Miss Keene," Chen called, waving Hollis over. "We're going to need detailed statements from you about how you discovered all this. But I want you to know, you did good work here. Without your persistence, we might never have caught this." Hollis nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Relief that it was over, satisfaction at seeing justice served, and deep gratitude for the animals who had helped make it possible. She reached down to scratch Ranger's ears, then gently stroked Smudge through her jacket. The foreman sat in the back of a police car, still talking. His statement would provide crucial context for the physical evidence, filling in the gaps about how the scheme had operated. Deputies recorded everything, building an airtight case that would ensure Truitt faced consequences for his actions. The morning stretched into afternoon as the warehouse was systematically documented and cleared. Truitt had been transported to the county jail, his protests falling on deaf ears. His carefully constructed world of privilege and corruption had finally collapsed, brought down by a shelter worker, a rescued dog, and a tiny kitten who refused to give up. Chen approached Hollis one last time. "We'll need you to come down to the station later to give a formal statement. But for now, take these two home and get some rest. You've all earned it." Hollis nodded, too emotionally drained to speak. She led Ranger back to Ephraim's truck, climbing in with her small family. The German Shepherd settled beside her, alert but relaxed. Smudge stretched in her jacket before curling up again. Through the windshield, she watched as box after box of evidence was loaded into police vehicles. The scale of Truitt's operation was staggering, but it had ultimately proved to be his undoing. His own compulsive record-keeping had provided the proof needed to bring him down. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the warehouse's open doors. Inside, deputies continued their methodical work, dismantling years of careful deception one documented item at a time. The case that had started with 2 abandoned animals in a duffel bag had grown into something much larger, exposing corruption that had festered unchecked for years. 3 months after the warehouse raid, Hollis sat in the courthouse gallery as the judge delivered Conrad Truitt's sentence: 25 years for multiple counts of arson and fraud. His foreman received a reduced sentence of 5 years in exchange for his full cooperation. The restoration of the county's K-9 rescue program came as a welcome surprise. Under the fire marshal's supervision, the program would be rebuilt stronger than before, with proper oversight and funding. When Chen approached Hollis about training as Ranger's official handler, tears welled in her eyes. "He already trusts you," Chen had said. "And you've both proven yourselves under pressure. We'd be lucky to have you on the team." At home, the sound of power tools filled the air as Ephraim worked on installing a dog door. He'd insisted on doing it himself, measuring twice and cutting once with careful precision. Hollis watched from the kitchen, smiling as Ranger supervised the installation with intense curiosity. Smudge, now officially adopted and sporting a proper collar, lounged on the windowsill. The grey kitten had grown sleek and confident, though he still preferred high perches where he could oversee his domain. Hollis ran her fingers over the new badge on the counter. Not a shelter ID, but a real fire marshal K-9 unit credential. Beside it sat 2 food bowls, one for each of her rescued charges. Such simple objects, yet they represented everything she'd fought for. The night clerk, who everyone had overlooked, had become someone who couldn't be ignored. Her instincts had been right. Her persistence had mattered. What started with a mysterious duffel bag in the road had led to justice being served and a whole new life being built. Ephraim stood back, admiring his handiwork as Ranger experimentally nosed through the new dog door. "Perfect fit," he declared with satisfaction. Hollis smiled, taking in the scene, her small but mighty family, safe and together. She had refused to give up when it would have been easier to look the other way. That choice had changed everything, transforming not just her life, but the lives of those around her. The victory belonged to all of them. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.